MPH Sports Podcast. Talk sport and property with sports people discussing their careers and how property played a part in it.
Richard Lee, welcome to Talk Sport and Property, my man. How are you?
Yeah, very well. Yourself?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Cheers for coming on the podcast, mate. I've really enjoyed researching your profile for this podcast. It's nice to get to know your background properly. We've got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, looking forward to having a chat.
Cool. Firstly, though, how's your podcast going?
Yeah, really good. We do a couple of weeks. We have like a roundup show, a goalkeeping roundup show that we do. So it's very, very niche. But there are a lot of people in the goalkeeping community that seem to enjoy it. So we get a good number of listeners every week. We do a lot of feature podcasts as well. So we've had a lot of Premier League goalkeepers, ex-Premier League goalkeepers on, and that's the one that I quite like. So kind of digging into the minds of some of these top ex-Premier League goalkeepers and current Premier League goalkeepers has been quite nice for a lot of our audience.
Yeah, no, brilliant, mate. That sounds really, really good. Well, I know you've listened to the podcast before, but just to remind you that we're going to break this podcast into two halves. We're going to talk about your career. Then I'm going to bombard you with some questions. And then we're going to talk about my favourite subject, property. So are you happy to start?
Yeah, let's crack on.
Cool. Okay, Richard, born in Aylesbury, 197 career appearances, 10 of these in the Premier League, 78 in the Championship, 110 of these for Watford and 87 for Brentford. You also had a loan move experience at Blackburn and also Fulham. That's really impressive. But when did you start your career at the Hornets, Richard? And how quickly were you offered that first professional contract?
Yes, I mean, I joined them when I was 10 years old, 10 or 11 years old. So I used to go to a lot of the local, or there was a local centre, like a school of excellence centre that I went to. And yeah, thankfully it just progressed kind of year on year that they seemed to like me as I progressed through. And then I left school at 16 in order to go and join them and do my apprenticeship, and signed a professional contract near enough on my 18th birthday from memory. But it was obviously quite a long journey to that point. And even once signing the professional contract, it was another 2 or 3 years before I made my professional debut. But no, really thankful to Watford, given that, I mean, in total, I was there for, I think, 16 or 17 years. Managers like Sir Graham Taylor initially, Gianluca Vialli, Ray Lewington, Malky Mackay, Brendan Rodgers, A.D. Boothroyd, and several others. So it was quite a journey.
Wow. Well, look, you were selected for the first team squad on the 23rd of March 2002 against Barnsley. I mean, look, how was that experience, Rich? And let's be honest, how desperate were you to get on that pitch? Because it must be so amazing to get picked for the squad, and then you're thinking, oh, this is great, I now just want to play.
Yeah, it's bizarre because for me anyway, I spent years watching Watford and always wondering, like, will that day come? Because it's not a given that you're going to make the bench. So Barnsley initially I was on the bench, and then eventually, even after that, it must have been, I want to say, another 18 months maybe until I actually played in my first game against Preston. So it's quite a long period of time really that I've been sat on the bench and waiting for the opportunity. And it was actually because I think we had a big cup game. We're in the FA Cup quarter final, and he decided to rest the number one goalkeeper and give me an opportunity. And he only told me at pre-match. So, I had literally 2 or 3 hours to prepare, really. But I quite like the fact that he did that. And he did that so that I wouldn't get too nervous before the game. But yeah, I still remember it like it was yesterday when he pulled me. We were in the Hilton in Watford tonight. And it was, the interesting thing was my parents already knew. They'd already contacted my family the weekend before that, because it was a Tuesday night, to tell them that I'd be playing. So it turned out I had sort of 20, 25 family, friends in the crowd. So yeah, it was a big night. And unfortunately, we lost the game 1-0. Funnily enough, actually, Sean Dyche got sent off in that game. He was a centre-back for us at that time. Sean Dyche got sent off about 10 minutes in, and they scored a penalty. And then after that, I played really well, thankfully.
Well, you must have done, because, I mean, it was after that game, really, you were given the number one spot the next 3 matches, and you kept 3 clean sheets. So you couldn't have done that badly at all. So congratulations, mate. I mean, was you quite a nervous player in light of the fact that you mentioned that you were you were only told 2 hours before the match that you were going to start against Preston?
Yeah, I think that, when I was younger, in fact, throughout my career, I'd always get nervous for games, which, the more I studied quite a lot of content when it came to the mind and how to, certainly when I was younger, I wasn't quite as educated in that area. So, yeah, and I always got mentioned the next 3 games. I always remember playing against, I think it was Derby and it was Ravanelli. Had a couple of really good saves from him. We beat them 2-0. I think we beat Crystal Palace away 1-0, and then we beat Sheffield United at home, I think 1-0 or 2-0. So it was, really explosive start, really. And I look back now, and they, it's the fact that I even remember those games says a lot, because they meant so much at the time. And then soon after that, I had a call up into the England under-21 squad for the summer. Fortunately, I got injured the season after and pretty much missed the entire season. But yeah, that start, or those couple of, if you're ever going to make your debut, and then not only making it, but starting so well, new contract as well from memory, getting called up to the 21s, it was a great time.
Yeah, no, that was right. So it was the 04-05 season you really became Watford's first choice goalkeeper. I think you may read him from Wikipedia, Richard. 38 appearances. You were right. You signed a new 3.5-year deal. And this was the key point. And I know this was something that I wanted to really talk to you on, because before the end of that year, you suffered an injury, as you just mentioned there. Looking back, how much of an impact do you think that injury had on that stage of your career? Because it was the following season that you went to Blackburn. I mean, do you think the injury had anything to do with it, or maybe it had nothing at all? I'm just, after being the number one choice, playing 38 games, then you have an injury, and then suddenly you're off to Blackburn Rovers.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I had a few around that time. So it was actually the season before I was out for, I think it was my upper arm, so the humerus bone. I managed to split in 2, and I was out for a long time with that, and couldn't straighten my elbow for a long time. But then got myself fit, played that season, as you mentioned. But then during that season, I broke my cheek, ruptured my bicep, and then my meniscus in my knee, all within the space of a season. The cheek initially, and I missed sort of 15 games or so, and then the bicep towards the end of the season. Then finally, when I did my knee, that was me then for the summer. And the Blackburn one was a strange one. It was basically because I knew that Ben Foster was coming into Watford that summer, and realistically I was then going to drop from a number 1 to a number 2 at Watford. But Blackburn, who were under Mark Hughes at the time in the Premier League, the goalkeeper coach that I had moved to Blackburn, and I knew that he wanted me. So I just felt at the time, either stay at Watford and be a number 2 behind Ben, or move to Blackburn into the Premier League at the time. Watford were only in the Championship that season. I thought, well, I'll take my chances. Let me get myself up there, and let's see what happens. So they offered or 2 from memory, but couldn't agree on a price. So in the end, they agreed for me to go on a season-long loan, and then they were going to discuss the idea of signing at the end of the season, which didn't happen. I ended up coming back to Watford, but I had a good season at Blackburn.
Well, I wanted to talk to you about that, because the season you were in the Premier League with Blackburn Rovers. Watford experienced promotion to the Premier League. I mean, was that a bit of a bittersweet moment for you, mate?
Yeah, it was. I mean, in hindsight, it worked out. Well, it was a great moment, to be honest, because what ended up happening, it did change the script a bit, because I was due to sign at Blackburn. There was an option in the contract from memory, and I can't remember what the price tag was. I think it was £1 million, I think. But at the end of the season, Blackburn then wanted to do the deal, but didn't want to get to that level in order to do the deal. So they were negotiating at that time. The fact that Watford had got promoted to the Premier League, it was a bit of a win-win for me, really, because whether I signed at Blackburn or went back to Watford, I knew I was going to be a Premier League player. And it turned out in the end that Blackburn moved on and went. And it was a different challenge, because I went back, and at that point, of course, I hadn't been involved at all in their promotion season. Ben Foster was still going to be there for another season in the Premier League. But of course, the other goalkeepers that were involved in the Championship season, the promotion season, were also involved as well. So it was a case of, in the end, I was fortunate to have a really good pre-season, and I managed to get myself ahead of Alec Chamberlain and Scott Loach at the time, and found myself as a number 2 to Ben, which ultimately led to getting a handful of games in the Premier League.
Yeah, I mean, can you remember your Premier League stats, Rich?
They weren't bad. I know my first game was against Man United. We lost 2-1, but had a good game. But then I remember we played Middlesbrough, and I think we won 2-0 in my next game. And I kept a couple of other clean sheets away at Man City in particular, we drew 0-0 and had a good night that night. I think we drew at home 0-0 to Sheffield United potentially. So I think I had three off. Unfortunately, it was only the one victory, a couple of 0-0 draws, a couple of narrow defeats. But yeah, got to play in some amazing games. We lost 2-1 away at Newcastle, which was a highlight as well to play at St James's Park. Played at Old Trafford. Lost there. They were very good that night. Ronaldo, Rooney, both scoring. Ronaldo a penalty. So, yeah, look, although it wasn't a successful season for us as a club, we did get relegated. Certainly from a personal point of view, some amazing memories.
Yeah, I mean, I looked at Premier League stats. I mean, to keep 3 clean sheets out of 10, I thought that was really good.
Yeah, I was pleased. It was just a shame we weren't scoring quite enough that season, unfortunately. But it's like it is now. If you go into the Premier League, you're not able to spend the tens of millions that you need to now. It was always going to be difficult. And we actually started the season quite well, but, so the first 10 or something like that. So we weren't getting beaten every week, but we just weren't getting the wins we needed. And yeah, unfortunately, by about February, March time, the writing was on the wall, really. But as I say, some real positive memories. Yeah, unfortunately, it was relegation.
Yeah. So that season, obviously, you relegated back to the Championship, but you also personally signed another extended 1-year deal on your contract. But more importantly, look, you started the following season as an undisputed number 1 choice. 41 appearances. That must have felt great, back at Watford, number 1 choice again. I'd like to think you'd have just started with a whole new bag of confidence and attacking the season with a new ambition to get back into the Premier League, right?
Yeah, it was. So they brought in, so Ben Foster went back to Manchester United. They brought in Mark Poom, who was effectively coming in as a number 1, but thankfully I was able to oust him reasonably early. And as you mentioned, I kept my place for the majority of the season and was captain for a number of games as well. So yeah, real memorable season. It was a shame really, because we made the playoffs. We fell away towards the end of the season. We were in the top 2 of the season and we did make the playoffs, but yeah, unfortunately the playoffs didn't go too well. We lost to Hull City in the semi-final of the playoff. Yeah, which was unfortunate. Things then changed after, if I'm honest. Things were going very well really up to that point. And then after that, I lost my place the following season. And yeah, you look back and there are certain moments in your career, I mentioned several that certainly went my way, but that was certainly didn't go my way and changed my path at Watford, unfortunately.
Did you enjoy being captain?
Yeah, it was something that I ended up doing it quite a lot then when I joined Brentford. But no, that was the only time I was captain at Watford, and we were unbeaten actually in those 8 games. But it was a period of time that we had far too many draws from memory. But yeah, it was quite an honour. It was something I hadn't even thought of. And when the manager called me to say that he wanted me to be captain, I was delighted. It was something I look back on. I still talk about it now with pride. Similarly, when I was at Brentford and then MB captain there, it's always an unusual one as a goalkeeper being captain, because you're not necessarily, I suppose, involved in the play at all times, of course. So it's a very different role to what you might have if you're an outfield player. But certainly I kind of took it as a compliment first and foremost, and then I'll use the opportunity. But I tried to then make the most of being captain, maybe off the field more than on the field.
Yeah, I could imagine you've been a very good captain, actually, Rich. Natural sort of leadership skills, very vocal, opinionated, a bit in a constructive sort of way. I mean, how did you change your approach to the game ahead of maybe a non-captaincy sort of role?
Yeah, I think that in terms of the actual approach, not hugely different. You've got the obvious things such as the coin toss or going into the referee's room before the game, meeting the other captain and having a quick chat with the referees. So there was kind of like a few admin bits and pieces, before a game, try and speak to lads individually if I felt like they needed it. And certainly as I got older, realising that I had that role within the team a little bit more. So it didn't really change too much as to what I did, other than the obvious bits and pieces. And maybe at the end of games, if good, bad or indifferent, if I felt like there needed to be a voice or something needed to be said, then, I was happy to play that role. I think I did that anyway, to be honest. I just think that was how I played.
Fast forward into 2010, you decided to turn down a deal at Watford and sign for Brentford. Would you mind explaining what the motive was behind the move?
Yeah, it was simply that I just didn't feel that I could see an obvious route back into the first team at Watford. I think that I suppose I got to a point where I wanted to be a guaranteed number one somewhere. And with Watford at the time, Scott Loach was doing very well as it turned out. And so I saw that there was an opportunity to go to Brentford. And actually, the deal that Brentford offered wasn't any better than what Watford offered, funnily enough. But it was more a case of actually, like, if I go there, I can be the number one, and ideally, I don't want to finish my career and look back with any regrets, and if I can look back, and as I do now, and I've played a couple of hundred games, it's a decent number of games. So yeah, it was just very much with me having not played for a season or two at Watford properly to actually get the opportunity to play.
So life at the Bees, it wasn't the ideal start, was it?
No, it certainly wasn't. The first game we played Fulham in a pre-season friendly, bitter rivals Fulham, losing 5-0 and being at fault for one, if not two. And yeah, and as much as I was brought in and guaranteed to be number one, I soon found myself as third choice.
It's very honest, that, Richard.
Yeah.
But things did start to move in the right direction. You eventually got your number one spot and helped the boys get into the League Cup final. You also won Fans Player of the Season. I mean, you would have taken that looking back, right? First season to have won those accolades.
Oh, it was phenomenal in the end. I mean, I ended up literally write a book about it because it was just such a bizarre season. And I saw it as quite a nice opportunity to put some of the ideas I'd learned psychologically and use that as a bit of a platform, because it was a mental season from signing as first choice to then finding myself as third choice, only being given an opportunity in the cup games, but then going on a phenomenal cup run. I think we won 5 penalty shootouts, or certainly 4 out of 5, I think it might have been. Eventually losing in the League Cup to Birmingham, who went on to win the cup, made the final of the JPT trophy back then. So yeah, it was just a crazy season, and eventually winning my spot in the league. I mean, they're thick and didn't make a game on time. It was just one of those mental seasons, really. So, and unfortunately, that was another season that ended in injury a week before the final, and the first time that I was due to play at Wembley. Never did get to play at Wembley, but due to play at Wembley, and I dislocated my shoulder, so I ended up missing the end of the season, unfortunately, with him. But one that I look back very fondly.
Oh, that must have been so frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, it was. As I say, I was fortunate. Well, I say I was fortunate enough. I got to play in some of the big grounds in the Premier League, but yeah, Wembley just eluded me. And even in the playoff finals, and we made a couple of playoff finals, I was injured for both of them as well. It was just, I had a few. I mean, there was, even when I mentioned about my broken cheek earlier in my career, it was a week before due to be playing at Anfield in a 2-leg semi-final in my sort of breakthrough season. So I was, I look back now and, touch wood, I'm in decent enough physical health, but it is something I really have to be wary of now, given the number of injuries that I did pick up.
You were at Brentford for 5 seasons. You played 87 times, but your injuries forced you to retire at only 31. I mean, it's so young for a professional goalkeeper. Do you look back and think, if I could, maybe look after myself differently, or would you change your character, or was it just down to just bad luck?
Yeah, I think that I don't think I was ever built to be a goalkeeper. I've said that a few times, and the example I always give is the fact that, and this is true, I was allergic to goalkeeper gloves. My hands would come up in terrible rashes and eczema and what have you. So I really don't think, I think biomechanically I was never really built to be a goalkeeper. I'm 5'11" for a start, which is very, very small in today's game. So no, and I think that, you look at a lot of the top goalkeepers now, they have a certain physique which allows them to be that little bit more robust. And what I tended to find was I'd happily train harder than anyone. And I did, so many different types of exercise in order to make sure I was as powerful, athletic, as quick as I possibly could be. But seemingly I just kept getting to the point where, as much as I'd push it, I'd keep breaking down. I mean, there were a few things that I would have changed in hindsight in terms of my training regime, but I think ultimately I probably maximised what I could have done given the body that I've been given. So no, I've got no real regrets. If anything, what it did allow me was it gave me a bit of a platform to move on into the world that I'm in now, where I do advise a lot of goalkeepers, and in fact, everything I do is goalkeeping related, whether it be the podcast or goalkeeping schools for kids, writing a book on goalkeeping, etc., etc. So I look at it more as that it's kind of given me the base to build what I'm building now. as opposed to looking at it and thinking, oh, could I have done a little bit more? Because truth be told, things could have gone very differently. And there's very few goalkeepers my size, my physique, that actually make it into the professional game. So I tend to look at the positives as opposed to the negatives.
I think it's a fantastic answer there, Richard. It's really, really good. And I think it's also, I actually think, looking at your career now, and I know, we've known each other for a couple of years now, but I actually think it's done you justice, coming out of football and giving you a positive step in the right direction in the world of business. Looking at what we're going to be talking about in the second half of the pod, maybe it was the right thing to have done. Just out of interest, I mean, look, the club rewarded you with a long-term service award. How is your relationship with Watford and Brentford now?
It's good. I mean, I don't necessarily speak to people at the club all that much, but no, always been good. I've gone back to Brentford a few times to do the commentary on the Bees player, and I've gone back to Watford several times. In fact, one of the goalkeepers I work with is now a goalkeeper at Watford, so I've actually gone into the training ground a few times recently, which has been nice. And similarly, if I ever wanted to go and watch a game or anything like that, they'd always look after me and give me a few tickets, etc. So no, I've got nothing bad to say about either, and they're still very much the first results I look for every Saturday.
Okay. Well, that was brilliantly done. Thank you, mate. I know we've had a bit of an internet problem here today, so I apologise for maybe this a bit of the stumbling block here, mate. The next part of the pod is where I'm going to ask you 10 quick questions. So are you ready for me?
Beautiful. Let's go.
Number one, are the goalkeepers always the crazy ones in the dressing room?
No, I think that, well, yes and no. I think yes, that you need to have, I suppose you need to be a little bit crazy and that you're not worried about hurting yourself. But I think ordinarily, outfield players won't agree with this, I think they're the most intelligent ones in terms of they need to be or need to have the ability to compute what's going on at all times, seeing the game, reading the game, understanding what the probability is in terms of what strikers are likely to do, wingers are likely to do. They need to take their position according to that decision making on technique. Do they catch? Do they parry? Communication, etc., etc. So I think it's a very different position. So I'd go more intelligent than crazy.
Right. Number two, what other position do you wish you had played at professional level and why?
Well, I mean, I wish I'd have been a golfer, so that doesn't quite count. But
so do we all.
Yeah, if I was to have played another position, then I'd have to be striker. They've got it easy. They can miss 4 chances, score 1, win the game 1-0. They're the hero. If you have that as a goalkeeper, you make 4 bad mistakes, 1 great save, you're still going to be the villain. So no, I'll definitely be a striker.
Number 3, the best goalkeeper you have had the privilege of sharing the pitch with?
Oh, good question. I would say, it'd have to be Van der Sar, I would say. But got to play against some really good, obviously with Ben Foster, against Shay Given, with Brad Friedel. So I got to meet some really good ones, but I'd have to say Van der Sar.
The best striker you have played against? And I know there's a few here, but just the one.
Yeah, I don't know if he's technically a striker, Ronaldo, but I mean, Ronaldo would have to be certainly the best player I've played against. In fact, that Man United team, there were several. Obviously, Rooney at the time as well. Henrik Larsson in one of the games playing for Manchester United, he was excellent. Got to play against Adriano randomly as well. Got to play against Inter Milan once, and he was very good. But yeah, I mean, Ronaldo comfortably the best player.
Wow. The player in training that helps you improve?
For me, it would always be, it's a tough question. When you're working with a really good goalkeeper and goalkeeper coach, and the atmosphere is vibrant, then you do tend to improve quite quickly. So the goalkeeper department we had at Watford with Ben Foster, with Alec Chamberlain as a coach, Scott Loach as well being there, that was a really good goalkeeping department. So I'd probably say during that time.
Cool. The one thing you have to compromise on to make it to the very top?
I think there's certain sacrifices, and I would use the word sacrifice, but I think it's very much being able to manage your time and to understand that it's, there's so many areas you can improve. So realistically, it's going to cost you maybe going out as much as you might want to go out, or doing extra curricular, is that the one, activities? But look, I think for the very best players now, you have to dedicate so much of your time to being the very best you can be. And I think that's the biggest sacrifice, is realizing it's not just what you do at the training ground, but understanding your afternoons, evenings. If you can also dedicate more time to your craft, then you've got a much better chance of making the top.
Yeah, very, very good advice. Your career favourite moment, Richard?
I got to play in an FA Cup semi-final. That would be the biggest game, I'd say. But my best moment, and that was against Man United and Villa Park. Just, I can still picture that now. Phenomenal day. But my best moment, we beat Everton in the Cup. So Brentford and David Moyes brought a full-strength Everton team who were doing very well in the Premier League at the time. And we beat them on penalties. And personally, best game I've ever played.
Wow. At Villa Park, full house, semi-final.
That was, and that was they battered us. So United that day, they were great.
What's the best ground you have played at?
I suppose as a Man United fan as a kid, to get to play at Old Trafford was phenomenal. To play at City was good, but I mentioned earlier playing at St James's was always one that I always used to go there with my mate when I was younger, and just a crazy atmosphere there. And so playing there, I'd have to say, and that was even. No disrespect to ourselves, but Newcastle versus Watford isn't Newcastle's biggest game, but still the atmosphere was brilliant.
Was it? Yeah, but the fans up there, they're just so passionate, aren't they? I mean, I've never been to Newcastle, actually. I've been to other stadiums up in the northeast, like Sunderland, where, again, just sitting in the away end, the atmosphere is just so intense. So I can see why you've done that. And I've been to Old Trafford many a times, and as amazing as the ground is, the atmosphere isn't always as strong. So I can see why you said that. This is an interesting one because I follow you on Instagram, and I always have done. And I see some of the videos you post, and I see some of these mad penalty saves that you make. So, number 9, Richard Lee, what is the best feeling, saving a penalty or keeping a clean sheet?
It's all the context. No, it's all. Thing is, you could save a penalty in a 5-0 defeat and not have had it. In fact, there you go. That was my last ever game. That's a good example. So we won the penalty shootout, but we drew the game 6-6, believe it or not. And that was actually one of the reasons I decided to retire. I didn't play very well, but we did actually win the penalty shootout, and the fans were singing my name as we came off the pitch. But I didn't feel that good about it. So I'd probably. It is saving a penalty shootout. If it's saving a penalty, if it's to win a penalty shootout, nothing better than that. But you can't beat keeping a clean sheet.
Cool. Right. Last question. Watford or Brentford? Playoff final. Playoff final. Who do you want to go up? Who do you want to see going up?
You see, I can't answer this. This is the impossible question.
And that's
no, do you know what? I'd have to. Yeah, it is so tough because it's such affinity with both. I don't know. I really, really don't know. I think that I'd probably have to say Watford just purely for the fact that I spent that many more years with them. Yeah. But ideally, my perfect scenario is that it's going to be Norwich and Watford go up automatically, and Brentford go up in the playoffs. That would be the dream this season.
Well, let's hope that continues, shall we?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Right. Well, we'll wrap that one up and we'll come back to property, my man.
Beautiful.
Right.
Talk Sport and Property Podcast, sponsored by MPH Sports Property Academy. Download the app today from the App Store or Google Play by typing in MPH Sports, the trusted go-to app for sports people looking to buy or learn about property.
Richard, welcome back to the pod. So look, we met a couple of years ago. You've always been really supportive of MPH Sports and recommending, fellow sports people like yourself to us. But in your opinion, why is getting property right so important to young players?
Yeah, I think, whether it's property or any type of asset that you can get, I just think it obviously makes a lot of sense. I mean, to be honest, when I was younger and I kind of had the right idea of going into investment and bringing on assets, but they weren't necessarily the right things at the time. And of course, there's so many different things you could do, so many different areas you could put your money. But the dream scenario for any footballer is that come the age of retirement, whether you've earned a relatively small amount of money or a big amount of money, the dream is that come the age of 35, that's when you're going to retire, that you can choose what you do in the next step, your next chapter. And I think that one of the biggest mistakes that footballers can make is to live to their means, because, trust me, and I'm sure any ex-pro will tell you this, the moment you retire, so hard to earn the kind of money that you're earning when you're playing.
So when did you buy your first property and where was it, Rich?
So my journey with property has been quite an entertaining one, and I'll give you the long and short, which is when I was 19 or 20, I was fortunate enough to buy my first one in Watford that I lived in, and I think I've moved, I want to say 15 times since. So I've moved every year or two, and it's been a mixture of ones that I've owned and ones that I've rented. At one point, I had 7 properties, which included one I lived in. I had 3 student properties, one in Birmingham, like a 1-bed apartment. Then I had one in Dubai and one in Egypt. And then I went from 7 back to 0, partly because the one in Dubai and Egypt never got built. So lost a lot of money with both of those. The student ones actually did quite well, and I probably should have held on to them, but I was a little bit rash in moving on from them, and did reasonably well from the one I lived in. The one in Birmingham, not so good at the time. So I learned the hard way. I made maybe a lot of rash decisions without thinking it through. So I actually went all the way back to 0 and invested my time and money into other projects, but always with the intention that I would get back into property as and when I felt that it was the right fit.
Right. We're going to go slightly off script here, Richard. Why did you buy in Egypt and Dubai? How did these opportunities come about? I need to know.
Yeah, look, it was a classic one of, and again, a lot of the lads listening to this will no doubt have had this, where someone that I knew at the time was kind of getting a lot of footballers to invest in Egypt. And it was I guess with a lot of these investments, you look at the different opportunities, some that you've got the potential for capital growth, some because it's a really high percentage yield. And at the time, Egypt was kind of seen to be this, well, look, you're getting it for next to nothing. It was such a cheap investment, but lovely looking development. And the yield was going to be, very, very high, and potential for growth. And there were plans in Egypt for XYZ. So you kind of sold the dream a little bit. And then 1 or 2 things happen over time. I think one of the main guys in the development, I think died in a helicopter crash or something. I can't even remember what happened, but suddenly you start to realize that it's not quite as it seems. And of course, the law over there isn't quite the same as the law is here. And over time, the hope of it getting built became less and less and less. And in the end, I just put it down to being an expensive lesson. And the one in Dubai was actually a little bit different, that things were going crazy in Dubai at the time. And of course, I bought, and I must have sold it for half of what I bought it for, literally half. Things just then plummeted. And then at that point, I needed the money for something. And, so I think it's like anything, there's so many opportunities out there, but some are going to be incredibly volatile. And I think it's very easy to buy into the positive potential with all of these and not really consider the downside. And certainly where I've changed my mindset now is to be a bit safer when it comes to my investments, knowing that it's not necessarily a short-term strategy. If you're investing and you're investing to be in a good position when you retire, for instance, it doesn't have to happen overnight. Ideally, you want to have something that's going to be reasonably solid and pay you a good return.
Yeah, sure. You mentioned that property was always going to be part of your plans. I mean, look, you and I have recently set up a couple of property companies. We've just completed on your first investment with us. Why was you always going to come back to this? At what point did you think, well, actually, I've retired now. I've got my home sorted. My business is now flying. At what point did you think I need to revisit this and put this plan into my future?
At that point, I think the moment that I knew things were going very well, and I had, I suppose, an abundance, I suppose I'd use that word, where in terms of making enough for the day to day. And this is the way, I know a lot of people have read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and it's a book that I refer to quite a bit. In that, for me, it was a case of, right, what do I need to have my day to day life, which I'm pleased with, and I'm reasonably comfortable, and I'm enjoying my day to day life. And can I get to the point where I'm making more money than needed? And providing I keep my lifestyle the same, then there should be an excess, and that excess is either going to sit there in the bank and not do a lot, or I put it towards different projects. And I've got a few different things I put it towards, some that are riskier than others, but this is the one that certainly I see as, especially when the yield can be between sort of 7 and 9%, very good yield. I think that, and when you know that they're more often than not going to be rented out, and realistically, if you don't need to sell them anytime soon, then in theory, you can just keep building and building and building. And that was always going to be part of the plan once I felt I was in a position where I had that excess income every month, which thankfully, I'm in that position now.
Yeah, good. I think that's really good advice. I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast that I really enjoyed reading up on your profile, Rich, and I meant it. And the reason for that was not only did I enjoy your stats, but it really highlighted your entrepreneurial skills, I guess. You got a real appetite for business, haven't you? When did you discover that?
I think certainly when I was quite young, given that my dad's always been very entrepreneurial and done incredibly well for himself. And so when I was, 22, 23, I went on Dragon's Den. That was kind of my first. And it was actually on the back of that, I guess, because that then probably added a bit of belief as to what I could do in the business world. But I was still incredibly naive. So I think that then, and then for me, it was the realization that if you can build a business, it's going to take a lot of your time, but there is the potential that you can build something that can be very successful and financially can do very well for you. But of course, ideally, and this is the thing I love about property, is that it doesn't require any of your time or very, very little. So, whereas I'd always advise someone, for instance, if they were quite entrepreneurial and like the idea of building their business, 100%, I'd always advise you to move forward with that, as it's something for me I find incredibly enjoyable and rewarding as you build it. But certainly building businesses will take a lot of effort, a lot of emotion, a lot of your time. If you're looking for something that's quite a little bit safer, obviously, nothing's risk-free, of course, but something is a little bit safer, won't require a lot of time, then, the one thing that's been proven year on year on year, and it doesn't matter what the market's done really over the last 50, 100 years, that providing you're able to keep property long enough, it's something that, ordinarily will do very well for you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I remember you on Dragon's Den, Rich.
Yeah.
We're similar age, you and I. And me, obviously, coming back from a business background, I mean, it was a program I used to love and absolutely obsessed with it. So when I saw you on there, knowing for a while, obviously banging into my football as well, I was thinking, oh my God, I know this guy. Can you share with us that story of the cat business, where it came from, the motive behind why you needed a dragon to invest in it, and what would you have done with their money? And then, correct me if I'm wrong, you did manage to secure a dragon, but did it not then materialize? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So the actual concept was quite a simple one in that, I've been to America many times and they have headwear shops over there. I think they still do, called Lids. And they didn't have that concept over here. So it was essentially the same concept, and the connections we had at the time. My dad was very heavily involved in the headwear industry. So we just ticked a lot of the different boxes. So we thought, let's start off and get a shop. We got a shop in Leicester where my colleague lived. And it did really well, in truth. People, it wasn't in a prime location. People would travel out of their way to visit this shop. And then on the back of me, I suppose, being in the world of football, we got quite a bit of publicity. So we thought, and it was actually my friend who just said, why don't we just apply to Dragon's Den? I didn't think anything of it, but suddenly the application led to a phone call or two, then a meeting. And then all of a sudden we get the phone call to say that, yeah, we've been accepted and we're going to be on the show. So we went to the show itself. And as you mentioned, the show went well. We were looking back now, we knew nothing really, comparatively speaking. But what we did have, I think, was that, we went on there with a smile. We enjoyed the experience. I remember I was so tired. I was at Blackburn at the time. I had a game the night before in Morecambe. Had to drive down. Got down at 3 a.m. Had the show at 6 a.m. Had to be there. Got called on at about 7 a.m. So tired. But thankfully, we put up a decent account of ourselves, and Duncan Bannatyne agreed to invest in us. And as you mentioned, it didn't quite go through as intended. But what it did do was, I suppose, give us that platform, because it's amazing that even now, and this is 15 years on, when I'll speak to people, and a lot of people seemingly remember that episode. So naturally, like anything, and like with football's given me credibility, playing football's given me credibility with a lot of the lads that I work with now. I think in a business world, having been on that, it does just add that element of credibility, which has certainly been helpful.
Did Come Dine With Me give you credibility as well?
Oh, totally. Not quite so much. Yeah, no, let's move on from that one.
Oh, that's brilliant. Rich, you mentor many young talented players in your career, in your new career, shall I say. What life skills do you pass on, and has property ever been part of that conversation with them?
It does come up. I mean, ordinarily, 99% of what I'll talk to them about is very much goalkeeper related and help them. I think, when it comes to mindset in particular, preparing for games, maximising what they do. But of course, from time to time, it will come up, especially the lads that are at a level where they're earning the kind of money where they can be looking, and then actually you don't need to be earning huge amounts to be looking at potentially investing. But I mean, my biggest advice, whether it's property or something else, is to have, and I've used it before, a long-term strategy. And certainly, and I'm saying this as a 38-year-old at the time, but I think certainly lads that are, 20 to 30 or 20 to 35, like there is so much time, there really is. And actually, if anything, it's been ordinarily proven that providing you keep putting money in what you believe are the right places, and ordinarily that will pay dividends longer term. I think where people do tend to struggle are there's so many schemes out there, and I've heard of many myself where it's the whole kind of get rich quick. And I think that, look, sometimes it happens and sometimes you get lucky. The truth is, though, that 90% of these, they just don't work. As I say, me buying in Egypt and Dubai are probably good examples of that. Or whether it be these schemes where seemingly you put in a tenner and you get hundreds back, they just don't work. So I think actually having a mentality of investing in things that have been proven to work over a long period of time, when I do give advice, it's ordinarily very safe now.
Yeah, good. You played professional football for 15 years. When did you subconsciously start to prepare for life away from sport, mate?
Probably quite early. I don't know why that was necessarily, but I set up my goalkeeper coaching business when I was about 24, 25 as well. And I think there was a part of me that realized that I was earning reasonably good money, not incredible, but reasonably good money at the time. I liked the lifestyle that I had. And there was in the back of my mind a bit of a fear that it might go one day. And so the thought of, okay, can I create something that's going to supplement this income and replace this income at some point? I love the idea of having a smooth transition from playing to non-playing, which, to be honest, I still didn't have, even after all the years. Bearing in mind I went on Dragon's Den 23, 24, retired at 31, 32. I still wouldn't say I had a successful business at that point. It was only really when I fully retired and fully invested my time into the business that it's become successful. So, but that was always the thinking behind it, was, can I have a transition from playing to non-playing that doesn't impact me too much? Because I see far too often that players do retire and it hits them hard.
Yeah. How is the Goalkeeper Academy going?
Good. Yeah, it's been quite turbulent really since we first set it up, and that it's kind of gone here, there and everywhere. But I do feel that we're building steadily now. I mean, lockdown hasn't helped, of course. We've had to shut everything down for the best part of a year, but things seemingly now are back up and running and at a very good level considering the lockdown. The majority of young goalkeepers are still with us, which is great. And if anything now, I think there is a real opportunity for it to kick on. We've got a lot of good people at the table in the business, and I love the concept. I love going to the different academies from time to time, visiting different centres. And it's great to see what's going on. As so many of our young lads have come through and joined professional clubs, and a few that have actually gone professional now as well, which is pleasing to see.
Yeah, I mean, you may or may not know this, but my daughter Chloe, she's at the PDC at Watford. They had a game against MK Dons last week, and as a dad, talking to other dads just watching the games, thankfully we're now able to do this. And the goalkeeper's dad came up to me and said, well, funny enough, she gets taught by the Richard Lee Goalkeeping Academy.
Oh, really?
I said, well, funny enough, I know Richard Lee. And he said, do you really? I said, yeah. And anyway, he was full of promise and good things to say about how it's really encouraged his daughter to enjoy sport through goalkeeping.
That's pleasing to hear.
I think you're probably doing a better job than what you think there, Rich.
Pleasing to hear, yeah.
I think he was always going to thrive after football, mate. I mean, I know we've had sort of meetings and conversations fairly regularly over the last sort of year and a half, but you do strike me as someone who's very confident, very intelligent. But what motivates you to become a better person, a better businessman?
I think, to be honest, it's more, for me, it was a realisation that I do really enjoy learning. And I say that, and that's not necessarily. I was an all right student at school. I wasn't great, but and I struggle when it's, say, reading a textbook or something at school. I really, really struggle with that. But actually, like, I'm fascinated by certain subjects, so I listen to certain podcasts that I think are gonna help me learn something new, because I always find I get a bit of a buzz when I'm taking in new information that inspires me or motivates me a little bit. So where possible, I always try and dedicate some time every day to learning something new, and then just enjoying what I do. So I think that I'm really lucky in that this role, which I've kind of created for myself to an extent, where I'm working with lots of other, goalkeepers, it is very much my passion. The people I'm dealing with and talking to, we've got so much in common. I love their company, good people, which that's life, right? It's kind of, you want to surround yourself with people that are going to elevate you and make you feel that much better, and vice versa. And if you feel that you can give value, which I think in this particular world, I feel like I can give serious value to a lot of the people that I'm working with, it then makes it the perfect match. So no, I'm really lucky. And that's where, people often ask me, like, do I miss football? Do I miss playing football? And the truth is, not at all. There's one or two bits that, of course, I really, really enjoyed, which I think of from time to time. But actually, the biggest bit for me was always the people you're around. And I think that, if anything, I've still got the majority of the people that I was always around that enjoyed their company. I've still got them very much in my life, which certainly helps.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought up the whole learning and education thing, because, we came into sport through education, and really proud of the property workshops that we do. Just out of interest, whilst you was at Antford or Brentford, did you ever experience any sort of property education at any of the clubs that you played for?
Not that I can remember specifically, which probably explains why I invested in Egypt. But no, not that I can remember specifically, because I think that it was more, and again, I was interested, but it was more off my own back. I'd be checking Rightmove every day, and I was always quite good with numbers and what have you. So I had a keen interest in myself, but it wasn't one where they would do workshops on that kind of thing. The only real talks we had at the time would be ones that were driven by the PFA, but it would often be like PFA related matters. So very little in terms of investing or other bits and pieces.
Yeah, sure. Rich, I think, I know I've told you this before, but I really do admire your bravery in business. I think for someone who's retired at the age of 31 to take on what you've done, I know you mentioned earlier about your dad, and your dad's probably inspired you to do a lot of things that made you a real success. But it's very brave, and I love seeing athletes come out of sport and attack the business world, and I enjoy those sort of conversations. I love the work you're doing, mate. So look, keep it up. You're doing fantastic. Just out of interest, what's your book called? Because I didn't know you wrote it.
Yeah, I've actually written two, but there's one the one that I'm proud of. The other one not so much, but the one that I'm proud of is Graduation: Life Lessons of a Professional Footballer. Did really well, actually. Got to top of Amazon Amazon Sports, for a day, ahead of I think Alex Ferguson had one out at the time. But yeah, wow. did really, really well, and the feedback's been great. So yeah, if you're bored one evening, then by all means, it's quite a short book, so I think you finish it in a couple of hours.
Good, well, I'll get it to the office and start reading. Rich, listen, two things. Firstly, one, always thank you for your support, mate. It's great to now actually work with you on the last acquisition. We've got something else going through at the moment, and also I'm really looking forward to the fact that we've got a golf date in the diary. Looking forward to playing again next month.
Indeed, hopefully good weather. Can't wait.
How's your game?
Pretty shocking, but it's fun. I'll get some practice in between now and then, so I'm sure we'll be just as bad as each other, I'm sure.
Fantastic, good man. Listen, mate, you keep up the good work, and thanks again for coming on the pod, mate.
Great stuff. Cheers, Lee.
No, mate. Thank you.
You've been listening to Talk Sport and Property. Visit the App Store and download the MPH Sports app today, or keep up with us over on Instagram.